Top 10 tips for taking the CliftonStrengths Assessment, otherwise known as StrengthsFinders. This is the assessment that I use at the beginning of any of my consulting or coaching with my clients because it gives us an unbiased, objective look at your self-awareness in terms of your personal process, how you go about things best for yourself in your life. So, number 1 is take the full 34. Most people who've been exposed to this assessment have taken it through their job or maybe school, in which you are only given your top 5. And then you talk about like, okay, your top 5 traits are this, yours are this is who would work best together. And you learn some information in terms of that. All beneficial, especially for maybe your HR department or your management team to figure out who's going to work best together in what ways. But when you want to go deeper into your self-intelligence, your self-awareness, and really learn your personal process and apply this information to all areas of life, you need the full 34. Because what it does is it takes all 34 traits that every single one of us use, but we all use differently, and it ranks them in order into this is the number 1 is what you're most natural at. This is your top. This is where you shine the most, all the way down to 34, where probably have some stress involved, some self-doubt, and that is not your natural way of going about things. So it's important to know all of them. The bottom ones, which most people will immediately look at those. Maybe you'll check out your first, couple, but then you go straight to the bottoms. You're like, oh, what are my weaknesses? That's not what those bottom strengths show you. Those are not your weaknesses. They are ways of going about things in life that don't serve you well. It's information that's very important to know so you can recognize it in yourself, because we do it all the time. One of my lowest strengths is competition, which means that I don't do well when I compare myself to other people. Do you think that there's a day that goes by that I don't in some way, shape, or form compare myself to somebody else? No, but I'm aware of it now, and I see it and I realize it when I'm doing it, and I can stop it before it brings me into a dark place that can cause me all kinds of unnecessary problems. So that's number 2. Number 3, look beyond the name and the definition that's given from Gallup from your results report. We get so caught up in the names. I've had a variety of clients, again, looking to those bottoms, and they're like, oh my gosh, empathy is 34 for me. Does that mean I'm heartless? Like I'm not a nice person? Not at all. I had a client as well who intellection was in their bottom. They're like, oh, great, that means I'm not smart. Or, it freaks people out if they see responsibility low. Like, what do you mean I'm not responsible? That's not what any of it means at all. They had to assign each one of the traits a name, a label. But the way that it's used in your life goes a lot deeper than the name. A lot deeper than the definition that's given. So we dive into what it actually means for you. And when I explain the meaning to the empathy low, intellection low, responsibility low, it clicks and it makes sense for people. And they're like, oh yeah, it's totally how I feel about things. Exactly. Which leads me to my next one, which is there's no good or bad, right or wrong strengths to have at the top or the bottom, in the middle. So if you look at yours and you're like, oh my gosh, I really wish that this one was at the top for me because that's a better trait to have in your life and, as a person. No, that's not true. All of them have amazing qualities to them. And all of them have things to be mindful of. And we talk about both of those in terms of the bridge and the tunnel to each one of the strengths, what it means in terms of what other strengths are around it as well. And there's a whole deep dive that we do into all of this that just brings it all to life, and it just makes sense. So let go of the idea that there are good or bad, right or wrong strengths in any of them. The other, number 5 is no two people will ever have the same exact results on the face of the earth, ever. It's statistically impossible. So when you say, oh, I don't need to do the Clifton Strengths because I know my Enneagram or my DISC or my Myers-Briggs, all of those are extremely beneficial and give you all kinds of information about yourself. But they also put you in a category with other people that might not do things. You might like, wait a minute, you and I are both like Enneagram 3s, but how come we're so different in the way we go about things and our personalities and stuff like that? This is just you. It's not a category with other people. So your full 34, your results will be unlike anybody else in the entire world ever. I had to repeat that because it's important. This is you. It's like your DNA, it's your thumbprint, however you want to look at it. It is unique to you alone. The next one is, it doesn't determine compatibility. So when I go through two people's results side by side, so we have all 34 of their traits compared to all 34 of yours. So achiever is number 4 for you and it's number 12 for you. This is what it means between the two of you. It does not determine compatibility. It just determines how you go about things. And most importantly, do you respect this about yourself and this other person? It's not like, oh, well, if they have these strengths different, they're going to have problems. Or if these strengths are too much the same, they're going to have problems. That's not the case. Where you're going to have problems is when you don't respect it in yourself and the other person. If you look at them and you're thinking, oh, well, you've got ideation high, so you're just going to be in la-la land all the time daydreaming, so I'm going to have a problem with that. And you don't respect it, that's a compatibility issue. But in terms of the actual thing and the process, that it doesn't determine it at all. I could be totally regimented and you can be somebody who's very, just go with the flow, whatever happens, happens. It doesn't matter, it all works out at the end kind of person. As long as you respect that in one another, you're good. And seeing it on paper helps. It really does, because you're like, oh, that explains why this. I couldn't really figure that out. And to be honest, it was kind of driving me crazy. But now that I see that that's one of your traits and that's a gift of yours, I get it. Yeah, that's great. And you have a different perspective of it, which helps strengthen the relationship. And number 7, the way I describe the full 34 again with people is the top 10. If you think of a movie and the characters in a movie, the top 10 are the people in the scene who come in and make everybody just feels good. You love when they're on the screen. They bring like this light and they bring this confidence and they're like just a joy to be watching when you're watching this movie and you're like, oh yes, I just love this character so much. Those are your top strengths. Your middle strengths, those are the supporting cast. They come in, they serve a purpose, but then they back out and they're not there in every scene. They come back maybe a little bit, serve another purpose, and then they're gone again. That's the middle strengths between like number 13 and like 28. Those are your supporting roles. You're going to use every single one of these traits, but those you might not lean in as much as you do your tops. So then the bottom ones, again, not weaknesses, but these are the villains. These are the ones that just come in and they cause problems. Nobody likes when they're around. Everybody's like, boo, go away. We don't want you here. That's what happens when you're in your bottom strengths, when you go about something. Like I said, when I compare myself to somebody else or somebody else is comparing me to somebody else and I'm like, hey, wait a minute. I don't do well with that. We need to stop with the comparison. Then I know how to address that villain when it's showing up and they're like, nope, your scene is over, cut. Moving on back to the main characters. So number 8, These are more fluid than separate. One of the main things when we go through these, the top 10 especially, is when we look at them and I'm like, okay, like here's mine, for example. And I look at this and I'm like, okay, there's empathy, woo, activator, individualization, communication, blah, 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 all these different ones. I can look at them as separate ones, but it makes more sense when I look at them together, because individualization is going to mean something different for me than it does for somebody else who has it high based on the other strengths that are around it. Because I make quick decisions, because I'm all about influencing other people and wanting to break down their barriers and disarm them and charm them, I'm going to use it in a different way than maybe if you have individualization high, but you have it surrounding like discipline and consistency. You're going to use it in a different way. So they all mesh together and are fluid in the way that we use them in that personal process that I talk about. Number 9, if you get overwhelmed by all of this information with the individual strengths and oh my gosh, top 10, bottom 5, there's 34 of them. What does that one mean again? And it just seems like it's overwhelming to you. First of all, we can do continuing coaching sessions to have them become more and more natural to you in terms of understanding them and leaning into them. But you can also break it down into these dominant domains right here. So each one of the 34 traits falls into a category: relationship building, influencing, strategic thinking, and executing. So we can focus on what I do is in the top 10, we count up how many of each are in it. So for me, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 relationship building, 1, 2, 3, 4 influencing. So I look at that and I'm like, okay, I'm very much about connecting with the right people to help move them forward. That's what lights me up. Executing, I've got 1 in my top 10, and it's belief. So it's not really even like a doing strength, it's more like a thinking strength. So for me, I know that, okay, getting things done the right way, sure, everybody likes to be productive, but it doesn't define me. It doesn't determine if I'm having a good day or not. It's the connections and then moving forward. That's what I know. So if you're overwhelmed, look at your dominant domains, and that's going to help you kind of narrow it down until you become more familiar with the individual ones that are in it and the fluidity of them. Number 10, know it, own it, love it, live it, feel empowered by it. That's what all this information does for you. It gives you something on paper, tangible, to wrap your head around that is unbiased. It's not coming from me after like 10 coaching sessions and I'm like, okay, this is what I see in you. No, this is you, your results of what comes from this assessment. So know it, learn it, spend some time on it, really dive into it so that you can utilize it. Love it. Don't fight against it. Again, we talked about there's no good or bad, right or wrong. Own it. Yeah, these are my top strengths. To tell you the truth, I was devastated when I saw that woo was in my top when I first got my results back. I'm like, oh my God, all my years of being a cheerleader, I'm an adult now. I am not a woo girl. If anybody watched How I Met Your Mother, I had to learn it. I had to know it. I had to understand it. And then I could own it. And now I'm like, yep, totally me, and I own it, and I love it, and I use it to my advantage and to help other people as well. And I feel empowered by it instead of thinking that it's something that I should minimize within myself because it is one of my natural gifts. I don't have control over it. It's how I am. It's how I was designed. So now I feel empowered by it, and I would love the same for you as well.